Few and far between are the high holy days I remember celebrating while Israel has been engaged in war. Further from any of our memories is the high holy days when Jewish hostages slept far from their families in fear. And our modern technologies allow us to see in real time ballistic missiles raining down on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I am reminded of a soldier who spoke to us 1 year ago, preparing himself to go into battle. His video image had one message for those of us able to commemorate that Shabbat. I would imagine he would have the same message for us on this Erev Rosh Hashanah. For those of us who can, he proclaimed, please lean in to the holiday. Experience joy. Step into the new year with all of your prayers for peace, for sustained success in defending ourselves. Honor this Rosh Hashanah as the new beginning that we know it can be and that we need it to be. It is so difficult for us to forget the imagery, the scenes of missiles descending, of fearful children hiding in bomb shelters. And yet these images are only reminders today of the terrible tragedy which struck us 1 year ago. For us, it is the scene of Hirsch Goldberg Poland's funeral, which looms most acutely and large. The 23-year-old Israeli-American hostage was killed by Hamas terrorists on August 30th when they became fearful that rescuers were near. We all watched the funeral. We all felt like he was one of ours. His father's and his mother's bravery was evidenced not only by their heartfelt pleas for his safe return, but for the very normal way that the community embraced them and they reached back to them with the richness of Jewish tradition, and in the way that they refuse to stop advocating for the hostages' release even after their own son was killed. This is not the Israel sermon that I wanted to give on this Rosh Hashanah. This is not where we were supposed to be. A year ago, I asked us to consider what were the prospects for peace in the Middle East. What major Arab power would come to Israel next with the offer of a mutually beneficial, official peace agreement? And then came October 7th, which utterly destroyed that game board. The pieces belonging to Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran, all of them went flying. Palestinian lives and Israeli lives were altered irrevocably in the span of a single day. And the attacks went on for a second day when we thought we could bear watching no longer. This is not where we were supposed to be. Which begs the question, where was it that we were supposed to be? What Israel sermon would I have liked to give this year on Rosh Hashanah? I love Israel. Ours has been an ongoing love affair. I have loved her ever since I first stepped foot on her soil 30 years ago, kissing the pavement at the airport named for her first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion. I immediately fell in love with the signs written in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, acknowledging, even on the signs, the complex nature of Jewish identity in the Middle East from the start. Her language felt like poetry in my mouth. I loved debating politics in Hebrew with cab drivers and learning to play sheshbesh or backgammon with old men in the alleyways of Jerusalem. Jewish survival, yours and mine, has always depended on Israel. Even before that state was formed, the Jewish heart has looked towards the east, ever imagining a time of peace and security, autonomy and self-determination, all of which were so fleeting and illusory for our ancestors throughout the old world. They dreamt of a better life. They dreamt a dream of 2,000 years manifest in one imperfect democracy, slowly making peace with her Arab neighbors, ushering in a new era of prosperity and freedom, rolling like a river of water from Zion and Jerusalem to the world. The sermon that I would like to give, I wish desperately that I could give, is to tell you that we are on the precipice of realizing that vision now. And yet, in this day of global gathering, as thousands sit together in sanctuaries like this across the globe, thousands more tuning in through livestream, we must recognize the challenges that lie between here and there. What obstacles must we still overcome before realizing, finally, Theodore Herzl's vision, Golda Meir's deepest wish? Somehow we find ourselves fighting for sympathy for over 250 innocent civilians, 100 of whom are still held in Gaza in the most horrific conditions imaginable, and the world turns away. The world has forgotten the horrors of October 7th, not even a year ago. It was Mark Twain who wrote about anti-Semitism that Jews have, quote, made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages and has done it with their hands tied behind them. This has felt like that fight for almost a full year. This year, Israel has weighed heavily on the minds of many of us. Last October, as Simchat Torah and the end of the High Holiday season were upon us, the Jewish people experienced the worst massacre of Jewish souls since the Holocaust, and a barbarism and cruelty that defied imagination. Babies, the elderly, women tortured, images out of some medieval pogrom come to life at peace-loving kibbutzim and at a festival near the security fence. 1,200 lives were lost on a single day and hundreds of hostages taken to Gaza. It was a devastating blow to the entire country of Israel and to the entirety of the Jewish people. These were civilians, men and women and children. These were Jews. We were to learn that the indiscriminate violence was also leveled against Christians and Muslims and Druze and Thai citizens and Israeli Arabs and dozens of nationalities who count their number among the dead and missing. And yet, at the center of this attack was a live and beating Jewish heart. That same heart of which we sing when we share the words, "My heart is in the East." Many in the larger community could not understand. They did not recognize the damage done to the Jewish psyche, to the Israeli spirit. They did not share in the pain inflicted on every one of us, whether or not we lived in Israel, whether or not we knew families affected, and we all did, whether or not we were critical of the Israeli government or fans of Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies. Our souls cried out in pain, even if we had marched days before for Israeli political reform in support of the Israeli Supreme Court's attempts to defend democracy. Suddenly, these politics did not matter as much as our shared trauma. Suddenly we were one, victim to unspeakable violence in our homes and workplaces, among friends, at a rave, and even in our personal bomb shelters in our homes. We were threatened. We were vulnerable. We were victims. None of us could have anticipated a second act of terror as it played out on college campuses and in cities across our own country this year. For what people is subjected to the atrocities, the war crimes of Hamas, the unspeakable humiliation and destruction, and then criticized for defending themselves? There is room for compassion for the Palestinian people who have been unjustly victimized themselves for months without losing our moral bearings and forgetting the responsibility and the mandate that the Israeli government has to ensure the security of their people. Next year, in fact, will mark 20 years since the end of the occupation in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians' most recent rejection of an independent state, and 20 years since the civil war in Gaza, which left Hamas to overthrow the rightly elected Palestinian Authority. That history matters. And the banners which flew this past year on campuses all over America, reading "From the river to the sea," they were not calling for Israel to leave Gaza, for that had already happened years before. Rather, they describe a call for the Jews to be pushed, literally, from the Jordan River in the east into the Mediterranean Sea to the west, to their deaths, from the river to the sea. Rosh Hashanah arrives each year asking us to consider the ties which bind us to one another, the tent under which we symbolically gather to usher in a new year. We feel deeply connected to one another in our congregation and together with other congregations, and especially in Israel. Today we share one fate, one destiny. This is a day of renewal and reflection. We turn inward to nurse the wounds inflicted during the past months and rededicate ourselves to advocating for and living Jewish values in our homes, at school, at work, in every one of our relationships. Today, the world is created anew, and we treasure with renewed vigor, especially those friendships with peace-loving friends from every religious denomination who have shared in this dismay that we have felt in the past year, and who share in our prayers for peace now. There were many reasons why this has been a difficult year, but I will tell you that standing with Christian and Muslim and many other friends, all of whom shared our tears as we have shared theirs, literally meant the world to so many of us here. It means the world as we stand at the gates of a new Jewish year. We know that our teshuvah will be incomplete today without acknowledging the deep and unfolding tragedy befalling the Palestinian people, our brothers and our sisters. How can there be any talk of peace and prosperity in Israel without recognizing the interconnectedness of their plight with ours? How can this all fit? How does October 7th and the current tragic hostage situation and a current humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza all fit into the larger understanding of Jewish history and any prospects for peace in the future? I will tell you that, for one, I believe that peace is not only possible, that it is inevitable. The only question which truly is without answer, is when. For how long will we delay peace? For how long will we see the well-being of the Palestinian people as anathema to our own survival, rather than choosing to see our fates as inextricably linked? Peace and prosperity will only come when we pursue peace and prosperity for all. For the sake of this future peace, I will resist tonight the natural rabbinic impulse to rewind the narrative back hundreds of years or even several thousand years and to recite the tale again. Because when the ongoing conflict is reduced to some version of "we were here first," neither side wins. Because at its core, what we are experiencing today is not a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. I want to repeat that. This is not a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Peace for Israel and the Palestinian people would have already happened several times over had other forces not maligned the peace process time and again. Yasser Arafat had every opportunity to sign an independent Palestinian state into existence. He quite literally had the pen in his hand and would not or could not sign. He would have received in the year 2000 at the final summit of the Oslo Peace Accords 98% of all of the demands made by the Palestinian delegation, much more than what is on the proverbial table now. And although Arafat would likely not have been able to enforce Oslo for the disparate Palestinian groups on whose behalf he claimed to speak, the real challenge lay, and in real terms, the challenge to a lasting peace now still lies further north in Iran. Earlier this month, we hosted a community screening of the profoundly disturbing and yet vitally important documentary about the October 7th attacks, entitled "We Will Dance Again," with the Deputy Consul General from Israel, Delphine Gamberg. She spoke about the resonance of Iranian policy behind every action of Hamas. When we read of Iran-backed militias, that is Hamas. And that is their alter ego in the north, the war's current frontline enemy, Hezbollah in Lebanon. Without dealing with the influence that Iran holds over every inch of Gaza, then I do fear that we push peace further into the future. Once we acknowledge that it is Iran pulling the financial strings, it is Iran hoping to sabotage peace efforts in the region, it is Iran placing Palestinian hospitals, Palestinian schools directly over arms storage and military facilities, using the Palestinian people as human shields in their ongoing war against Israel and the United States, then we might understand the necessary steps for creating lasting peace. The reality is that both the Israelis and the Palestinians have had so much time to consider this situation and every possible outcome that there is almost no debate about where to start establishing a framework for a peace agreement. In fact, several times in the past, some semblance of this same agreement has been negotiated and presented for signatures. There are, in actuality, only 4 steps to a new peace process in the Middle East. Peace for Israel and the Palestinian people comes down to 4 negotiations. Golda Meir famously said, "Peace will come when the Arabs love their children more than they hate us." But of course, Palestinians love their children. A parent, any parent, will go to the ends of the earth to protect their child. But the larger global forces of the Arab League, The leadership of Hamas and Fatah have placed heavy bets on the sympathies of the West. And these steps are anything but guarantees. For time and again, the peace that we all know will come has been thwarted at one step or another. Step one, the larger Arab world must recognize Israel's right to exist. Hamas's charter still calls, as it always has, for Israel to be wiped off the map. That must change, or others must lead. And this attitude towards the Jews and the state of Israel is in fact changing throughout the Arab world. Israel was days away from signing a significant peace agreement with Saudi Arabia when Iran launched the October 7th attacks. Saudi Arabia would have joined Egypt and Jordan as major Arab countries to sign sustainable peace treaties with the Jewish state, normalizing relations and recognizing one another's value in a mutually beneficial peace. Who would lose out in such an arrangement? Only Iran, the other Arab power, and the only one to use force against Israel in the past many years. As recently as April, top Hamas leadership declared that if Israel would simply lay down their arms and establish an independent Palestinian state, Hamas would transform itself into a political party, would unite with its rivals, Fatah and the PA, and would govern the newly formed Palestine together in the territory agreed to by the United Nations. This is what they declared. Recognize this is not what radical religious clerics in mosques all over the Middle East have preached to their faithful. This is not what From the River to the Sea advocates. But it does indicate a sea change in global Arab politics. It signals an openness to peace with Iran's influence waning. Step two, a conversation will begin with pre-1967 borders. And step three, an agreement on the status of Jerusalem. Truthfully, these are seen as two of the larger sticking points. They obviously will take some time to negotiate once peace talks begin again, when they begin again. But the consensus is clear, and it will only be a matter of time before we return to two truths. Jerusalem will always remain the capital of the Jewish state, and under Jewish rule, all religions and nationalities already have unfettered access to their holy sites in Jerusalem. Compare that to Jordanian rule before 1967, and the peace plan is clear. Jewish governance of Jerusalem must continue. And the second truth is that the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians understand that the 1967 borders, collectively known as the Green Line, the borders which existed before the Six-Day War of 67, will comprise the framework for a peace agreement. There will be land swaps in both directions, and the details, as one of my colleagues said, the final 10% will further define the borders of an independent Palestinian state. It is only a matter of time. That's a simple phrase, I know. Only a matter of time. It loses some of its simplicity when used in this context. In truth, this is substantially the same sermon I could have given 20 years ago about the context of a peace agreement in Gaza and the West Bank. And yet here we are, 20 years later, wondering when this peace might finally come. The final step, step 4, might be instructive. In order for us to arrive at step 4, we must learn a difficult lesson. Step 4 will be compensation for the Palestinian people, for the upheaval and the pain and suffering of multiple generations under Israeli occupation. The Palestinians will ask for this under the guise of the right of return. But there never will be an agreement which allows fourth and fifth generation Palestinians living all over the world to reclaim land in Tel Aviv or Haifa. Instead, there will be an agreement of responsibility, and Israel will show the world a Jewish face of accountability and compassion as we ease our new neighbors, the Palestinians, into new permanent settlements and homes. Jewish settlements will be removed, and Palestine will exist for the first time as its own country. And Israel will have performed its own teshuvah for the lives of millions of Palestinians who always deserved their autonomy and dignity and freedom. This step might be a hard pill to swallow for Israeli and Jewish hawks who cannot move beyond the conflict and who do not wish to usher in this new movement of peace, especially if those hawks are running the government as they are now. But it will come. It is only a matter of time. In so many ways and in so many walks of life in Israel, peace has already made important inroads. And I say that even as missiles fly. One of the greatest casualties of October 7th was that so many victims were peace advocates who chose to live and work near the separation fence to be close to Palestinians that they worked with. Business owners in Jerusalem now consider East and West to be largely one city with two populations. Yes, tension is high now, but the vast majority of both populations will return to pushing for peace soon enough. The return of over 100 captives will be the next launching pad for a peace process. I think back to my first summer living with Tammy in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Nachlaot, where our landlord would regularly employ Palestinian workers for small repairs or handyman tasks, even larger construction projects. These were individuals that our landlord knew well and had worked with them for years. Was there equality? I'm sure the answer was no. Were there pathways to peace? Was there a foundation that was being laid? Oh, yes. Friendships, shared business ventures will always be stepping stones to equity and equality and inclusion and peace. I end tonight with a prayer, specifically that America, that you and I will understand our role in bringing this vision to fruition. America remains the greatest hope for a Middle East peace process to return. These four issues, as I've laid them out, follow well-worn grooves in history's roadmap of Middle East peace. And yet, the solutions are becoming more and more visible with each passing day. In his seminal book, From Beirut to Jerusalem, Thomas Friedman lays out the histories of the conflict with unflinching honesty and, surprisingly, admiration for both sides. And he ends his book with this note of optimism. Having seen up close the failures of the past, he writes, I have met even more, many more, Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians, who are desperate for what America has to offer this region. They are men and women who are starved for alternatives and who cry out for sources of optimism. America must be the bridge builder between them. Even when America doesn't have all the answers, it can keep asking the right questions. It can keep hope alive. It can keep discussion alive. It can keep reminding people of what the good Lord tried to tell Moses. How exciting it is to know that tomorrow can be different from yesterday. I pray that today, as we usher in a new year, that year holds a new promise for peace in the Middle East, continued success and strength for Israel. Shana Tova.